Hi, everybody. This is Lauren Baker, host of the SEJ Show. Welcome to today's episode. I have Kameron Jenkins of Shopify on. Hey, Cami, how's it going?
Good. How are you? It's good to be here.
Good. Thanks for joining. I think it's been a while since we've connected and we had done a webinar last year or maybe the year before. The past
Mhm.
3 years are just like one big
A
calendar for
blur.
me. So, yeah, but it's great to reconnect and have you back. And you're at Shopify now.
I am. Yeah, I've been there about a year and a half.
Amazing. So, what are you doing on the Shopify side of things? And if you wouldn't mind, would you mind like going into a little bit about yourself, your journey, your background? Because I think most of our
Yeah.
viewers and listeners would find it pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently the content marketing lead or one of them at Shopify. I'm the lead specifically for Shopify retail. So our team promotes the products, Shopify's products for in-person sellers. So that's like Shopify point of sale and hardware and things like that. So that's my team. That's what I do currently. My journey has been, interesting for sure. I'm coming from a series of like two SEO SaaS companies. So I was very much doing content and SEO for content and SEOs. So it's been a bit of a transition to go to Shopify for sure, because we're talking to a whole new audience, which has been really exciting for me. So my past role, I was director of content and brand marketing at Botify. So that's like an enterprise SEO SaaS tool. And then before that, I was at Moz. I was doing like Whiteboard Fridays, the rewriting the beginner's guide to SEO, all of that stuff. And I landed there because I had spent many years in the agency world doing content and SEO and leading the content and SEO teams there. And so I got the opportunity to work for Moz to educate their audience about content and SEO. And I just jumped to the chance because I loved Moz. I loved Whiteboard Fridays. I was a big fan of their tools, but also their educational content. So the chance to kind of come on board and kind of see behind the curtain and do that myself was really exciting. So that's kind of my first foray when I jumped from agency life to in-house life. And I think I'm in-house to stay.
So, what attracted you to the position at Shopify? Because I was a little bit surprised to hear that you're working more so on the point of sales area within the
Mhm.
company, and looking at Moz and Botify. How many FIs like Mozify and Botify and Shopify, right? So,
I'll work at
um,
Spotify next.
yeah, exactly. So, what drew you to the ability to work and target B2Bs that it sounds like it's traditional brick and mortar retailers that you're working with or targeting? So,
Yeah.
what really drew you to that?
Yeah, I was first drawn to Shopify in general. I mean, like, I had seen so much of what their marketing teams and their product in general, but just following people on Twitter, I knew a lot of people, or of a lot of people who worked at Shopify who I really respected, and so I was like, wow, they're doing really cool things on the marketing side of things. So I was intrigued. That was the first thing that intrigued me about Shopify. And then when I thought about it, I was like, this is a really cool opportunity to kind of pivot my skills into a new kind of subject matter. I had been doing SEO and content and writing about SEO and content for so long that I thought this was a cool opportunity to kind of apply my skills to a completely new audience and kind of stretch myself and grow myself that way. It was also a really cool time to join that type of company and speaking to that type of audience, because this was like very beginning of the pandemic. A lot of brick and mortar retailers had to close their doors, or they were at limited capacity. And so a lot of them were actually moving online at that time. And the whole benefit of Shopify was that you can sell online and offline and it's all connected. And I just thought that was a really cool way to help brick and mortar retailers who a lot of them were struggling at the time. And
Yeah.
Shopify was helping them out and helping them stay afloat. So I thought that was like just a really cool time to join and help that audience out.
So you think BOPUS is here to stay? Buy
I think
online.
it is. I
Yeah.
think it is. Check out the Future of Retail report. We published it in January. It's got some really great, both qualitative and quantitative like data to back that kind of thing up. So definitely check it out.
So I'm really interested here in the whole like, and we can get deeper in the content a little bit after this, but I'm
Mhm.
really interested in the connection between online Shopify and then offline Shopify. So
Mhm.
especially with the shop app and everything else. So if I go into a store and someone that's utilizing a Shopify powered point of sale solution, can I
Mhm.
go in and then just pay with my Shopify account? Is that how that works?
So yeah, I mean, everything would be connected. So for example, if you, let's say that I was a consumer and I wanted to buy a shirt and I was browsing shirts online on one of my favorite stores, and I was like, hey, I want to save on shipping costs. I need it today. And I see that it's available in store. I can reserve it and say pick up in store on the website and actually go into the local store if it's close to me and pick it up because everything is connected. They use Shopify in store and online. It makes things like that super, super easy. It's not disjointed inventory, which is
Hmm.
a pretty big problem for a lot of people. Their online store and their offline stores effectively operate as completely different stores and completely different ecosystems. Whereas Shopify, it's like just, we call it like just one back office. You don't have to manage multiple things. It's just all rolled up into one.
Got you. Got you. And what about items that people are buying in the store that they're not ordering online or on their phone? Are they still utilizing Shopify to pay for it? Is that
Yeah,
how that
so
works as
the
well?
Yeah, so the Shopify point of sale is connected on the back end to the e-commerce store as well. So let's say I buy something in store and I check out using the Shopify point of sale. My information then goes into the Shopify admin, and they know me online as well. It's not that they have online customers and offline customers. I'm just a customer, and so whether I buy online or in store, they kind of see that all on the back end in their Shopify admin that you'd be familiar with if you like ever built a Shopify store.
That's super cool. So
Yeah.
I go and I buy something at the local, I don't know, donut shop, right?
Mhm.
They're utilizing Shopify. I buy my donuts. I'm a customer, right? I have
Mhm.
the ability to have the receipt sent to me, all of that, like I'm in the system, just like I am on a Square point of service. Like when I go to Movida
Mhm.
and I get my shake, I get my text that says, "Hey, you've had like 8 out of 11, 2 more shakes to go until you get your free shake."
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking in my head all of the like the integrations that I'm used to online appearing
Mhm.
in the offline world and that combining that's super exciting. At
Yeah,
the end of the day, really like
it
it's super
definitely
cool.
is. Yeah, I think so too.
Awesome, awesome. So you're leading content then on this team, right?
Mhm.
And your main target market are stores, brick and mortars, franchises, maybe hospitality, things along those lines. And I've seen you doing a lot of recruiting online for your content team, whether you've been doing videos, which are super cool, or just posting everything. So could you go into a little bit about your day to day on the content side at Shopify B2B, and then also a little bit about how you've been able to build out your team and how that is all communicated from just like an SEO overall success metric management perspective.
Yeah, so definitely one of the pillars of my job for sure as a lead is building out the team. So when I joined about a year and a half ago, there wasn't really a team, at least on the editorial side. We had someone doing a podcast, but we didn't have anyone on like the written editorial content side of things. And so it was kind of like, hey, come join the team and tell us what we need to do, build it out. And so that is one of my favorite challenges to tackle. I did something similar at Botify. And so coming into the team, I just, one of the first things I have to ask is like, well, what are our goals? What do you want from me? What did you hire me to do? And one of the first things they said was, hey, we need a steady stream of sessions and free trials. We need more awareness of the point of sale because a lot of people know about Shopify ecom. Many less people know about Shopify for in-person sellers. And so that was kind of my job, like grow awareness through content and grow leads through content. And so one of the first things that I decided to do was hire SEO focused content marketers. Whenever I hear, hey, we need a steady stream of traffic and we need a steady stream of free trials, like
Mhm.
organic search traffic is like the perfect tool for the job. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it's one of the first things that I decided to hire for. So we did hiring about 6 months into my time at Shopify is when I posted those first couple roles and started recruiting for that. Prior to that, to get the program off the ground, I started building all the foundations. So I got us set up in our project management software. I got like all of our tooling and reporting set up as much as I could. I started onboarding freelancers. I started briefing them in and producing content myself, just to kind of get things going and see where the gaps were and things that I needed to smooth over before I brought on in-house people. And so that's kind of how I got the program up and running. Since then, we've filled out the content team with people that fit specific gaps that we had, basically. So next hire was a product focused content marketer. We realized that we were producing really great top of funnel content that was driving a ton of sessions, and they were doing pretty well for free trials, but we realized that we weren't talking like as much in depth about the product as we probably should have been. And so we hired someone who's basically a mix of a product marketer and a content marketer, kind of this nice hybrid role. And he does a lot of like featured deep dives, and he does case studies and things like that. We realized that we also were only doing like mostly blog content, and that there was a huge opportunity with gated content. So we hired someone for gated content. So it's really just a matter of like trying things out and hearing what the needs are and the goals are, and kind of plugging people in to fill that. So that's been one of my main goals, is just like, what goals do we need to achieve and what type of person do we need to achieve those goals, and then recruiting for that.
It's really interesting because, when you're at Moz and then Spotify, it's basically to an extent the same market. There's probably a little bit of differences, right?
Mhm.
Enterprise
Yeah.
versus SMB or whatever,
Yeah.
or agency, but pretty much the same market, same types of writers, a pool of people. Like if I was going from one to the other, I'd probably be like, hey, you want to come over and write for Spotify now? And but you can't really do that on where you're at right now. I mean, there's of course there's some overlap, right, with like
Mhm.
Google business profiles and the ability
Mhm.
to upload your feeds and order and
Yeah.
buy right then and there, right, and things like that.
Mhm.
So I would see that being something that's highly relevant from the SEO world into finding an SEO writer to write on the
Yeah.
Shopify side. But what are some of the challenges or opportunities that you found looking for writers in I guess in a niche that you hadn't necessarily focused on previously?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I would say it differed a little bit depending on whether I'm talking about freelance writers or in-house content marketers. So for freelancers, they tend to be, at least the way I utilize them, is like you kind of want to plug them in and have them be effective, kind of just like plug and play. You need them now. So that you want them to kind of be more ready to go, rather than needing to train and onboard like you would expect with someone who's in-house and you're hiring like onto your team. So with freelance writers, I did look for people who had more experience in like the at least e-commerce. So that's like an easy transition into retail, for the most part. So who were familiar with commerce and had written for similar types of companies before. And also, I mean, that's not exclusively the only type of freelancer I've brought on. I brought on some freelancers who are just excellent freelancers who I knew could learn the subject matter fairly quickly. And we also paired them. One of the things that benefited them, I think, a lot is pairing them with a subject matter expert editor. So we brought someone on who is not just an editor like commas and things like that, but
Right.
he's coming on and he's like, hey, I have written for retail trade publications before. I know what things retailers would and wouldn't want to see. He can kind of edit from that perspective. And so that really helped us out as well on the freelance side. On the in-house side, I always consider it a bonus if they have experience in retail or commerce or that type of subject matter, rather than something that would disqualify or qualify someone right out the gate. I have found from my personal experience that content marketers, who are just really good content marketers, can learn pretty much any subject matter and ramp up fairly quickly. Which is, so we have a mix. We have a mix of people who are just exceptional content marketers who didn't have any experience in retail that were able to learn it, and they're doing great with that. And then we have some other people who are coming from a similar industry who kind of have that background already, and both are incredible assets to the team. But you're right. It's like, it's just a matter of like ramp up period, I think, with that industry.
Very cool. Very cool. So, um, you had mentioned that organic search, like that steady stream of views, eyeballs, sessions that can then funnel into demos or whatnot.
Mhm.
Organic search was like, that's where I want to be, right? Because we all know like you can start an ad campaign and turn it on and turn it off, whatever. But once you invest in search, it's going to pretty much be around forever. Great content, steady, and after a while, it's very predictable. One question I have for you is, how did you set up expectations to bring in that steady stream in terms of things like timelines,
Mhm.
testing, and really lay out those expectations and communicate those expectations with other stakeholders? Because I know from my experience with being in search, sometimes that can be very tough, right? Patience is a virtue, but it's not, patience doesn't always have a seat at the table. So
Mhm.
how did you set that up, and what tips do you have for other in-house content leads and or SEOs to help set up their expectations as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say honestly, it almost even starts during the interview phase. Like before I even joined Shopify, I mean, I consider interviews a two-way street. Like I'm evaluating also if I want to work there and for you. And so with the person who was recruiting me and we were having those initial kind of conversations, I could assess from the get-go that he had a basic understanding of SEO and that it takes time and that this is something he wants to invest in and that he would trust the person to kind of do what they thought was best. And so I really appreciated that. It's definitely not a requirement that like your lead or your department has to be like completely bought into SEO, but you're going to have a pretty hard time of it if you are kind of just like hitting walls and like just up against kind of constant like prove it, tell me why this matters, like that kind of response. And so just depends on what you what you're willing to fight for, I guess. But for me, I was kind of looking for someone who at least had a base level understanding of like the importance of what SEO like SEO focused content could do, and they had a basic understanding of like the fact that it would take time, the fact that it takes time to figure out what works for this audience, even because not everything works the same on every single type of site. And so thankfully, I was able to kind of join a team that understood that at a base level. But I would say, like, one of the things that I did a lot was just like reporting on success, even like tiny little wins, rather than waiting for like a month end kind of report to show like 30 over 30-day progress or whatever. Like in the beginning, it was all about like, hey, we published this 2 weeks ago, we're ranking here now. This means that we're getting this much traffic and we've gotten X amount of free trials from it. So those like kind of micro wins were really good at kind of getting people excited and understanding. The repetition helped them understand kind of what we were doing and what the results of it were, which was really important.
Very cool. That's really cool. I love setting those expectations, and it's great to hear that the people that you're sharing them with had an understanding of search. So
Mhm.
the ability to pre-qualify, you know, to your point, I think things have really changed in the world of like employment and recruiting and interviews, right? Because it's not a
Mhm.
question if you can find somebody.
Yeah.
It's like right now, it's a question of do they want to stay,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
or do they want to work for you, right? So, or with you. So that's really cool. So pre-qualifying from an expectation setting. I worked with so many in-house SEOs over the years that like don't have any buy-in whatsoever. Like they're
Yeah.
totally hating life all the time because of
Right.
that. So just hearing that it's not a toxic setting when it comes to like organic internally, that it's a setting that's lifting you up, and the
Mhm.
ability to do what you want to do and love to do and to support the company is,
Yeah.
is pretty cool.
Definitely. Yeah, it's deflating, and I've been there at companies that don't really buy into it, at least on the whole, or it's kind of a mixed bag. Like some people do, some people don't. It really takes the wind out of your sails. It's like, I know I'm talented and I know what I'm doing and my team knows what they're doing, but I feel a complete lack of motivation to do it because these people are just not getting it or they're kind of throwing roadblocks in my way. So it's always nice when you can find a company who trusts you and believes in the general idea of content and SEO or whatever it is you do. So you're not constantly hitting those brick walls.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great to hear. So, content is such a wide ranging offering, right? Like it benefits SEO, but obviously, but then really it benefits all marketing at the end of the day. So when you're putting together a content strategy and you have specific metrics or success metrics that you're holding that strategy against, do you go outside of SEO with those success metrics? And then if so, what are they?
Yeah, definitely. So because our content program, we call them streams, and so each kind of content marketer on my team owns a different stream. SEO is one of those streams, but it's not the whole program because, like you said, SEO or inorganic search focused content is a type of content, but it's not the only type of content. It's not the only thing content can do. Content is a tool; it's a means to an end. So it's all in like how you apply it. So for example, for our case studies, we would have definitely different goals than we would for our SEO focused content. We wouldn't, because we're not targeting case studies around like a particular keyword. They're a story, they're about a problem solution and the results. We might talk to our sales team to see how effective they have been in helping close deals. We might see how many free trials those case studies are generating because they're more like mid bottom funnel assets. You expect them to drive more free trials, even if they're not driving as much traffic to your site. They're kind of like an assist once people are already on your site. So it just depends on the type of content. You definitely want to judge each piece of content by what it's meant to do rather than applying the KPIs that were never meant to apply to it. I'm not going to judge a case study by how much like organic traffic it gets because it was never meant to do that. So it really just depends on the content type.
I have a story around that I'm going to tell.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do,
Yeah.
I'd like to thank InMotion Hosting and SEMrush for sponsoring today's episode of the SEJ Show. They're the ones that keep the lights on. So when you have a chance, check out SEMrush and InMotion Hosting. So speaking of content and different ways to measure success, especially on the B2B side or the SaaS side, I was working with a client years ago that had been a longtime client in the SaaS space, password recovery oriented style space. And we noticed that G2 and Capterra had been creeping up the results. And then once they started to hit page one, we're like, uh-oh, like I see a trend here. And now like it's everywhere. So G2 and Capterra, for those that are listening or viewing, it's peer reviewed, basically peer reviews of different SaaS solutions. And it's all over Google now, right? So whatever you search on Google now, you see like, hey, 8 best this, 10 best that. What's the best this? What's the best that? So it really started in the SaaS market and expanded to everywhere from there. So what we did was we're like, how are we going to compete against this? So we started doing battle cards and our client versus their competitors or alternatives of the competitor and those style of blog posts. And what we found was, first of all, from an SEO perspective, those similar data points and peer reviews and comparisons that were in G2 and Capterra, when we implemented those on the client side, we were one of the only ones that were the actual SaaS solution that were ranking after like 6 months for implementing this, right? Because it started with G2 and Capterra, then it was like business.com, and like every other publisher was doing their own version, tech.co. They're all doing like their own version of it, which is super cool. Super cool that we're still competing. That's super cool that changed from a Google user intent targeting perspective. But the cooler thing was I'm on a call with a client one day talking about these pieces of content, and they brought on someone from sales and they brought on someone from C-suite, and they're like, we've started sending this content to our leads and utilizing it in our nurturing funnel, and it's closing, right? Mm-hmm. It's closing leads when we had originally written it mostly with SEO in mind at the end of the day. So just hearing that was like one of those uplifting things, like, oh my God, what we're doing right here is not only just helping you rank, but it's helping you close every lead that you're getting in from various different funnels. First of all, it made me want to raise my prices because we had just written it for SEO. But secondly, it was incredibly reassuring, and it kind of broke through that barrier. You know, that siloed barrier that companies tend to have between, oh, this is done for search. Oh, this is done for this. Oh, mm-hmm. I didn't know that this team wrote a case study. Yeah, it's on a PDF hidden on a subdomain somewhere, right? So it kind of broke through that barrier, and it got teams collaborating. which was really cool. And we were able to like just get a lot more out of that content investment. So hearing that you're also doing something similar on the in-house side of things, we're like, hey, this content's not necessarily just for this, but it can support it. And you know what? Our success metric for case studies is not necessarily traffic, right? Because we know that's very low in the funnel. That's the buyer decision right there at the very bottom of the funnel. So it's not going to bring in the traffic, but it's going to bring in the most important people that are making that final decision at the end of the day. Is really cool to hear. And I love that.
And to your point, like it's always nice when you're able to get one piece of content to kind of fulfill multiple goals as well. So we have plenty of like bottom funnel, very like feature heavy content, but it just so happens that it targets a keyword with a lot of search volume as well. Like what is a point of sale system or something like that. It talks almost exclusively about our product because we are a point of sale system, but it just happens to have search intent as well. And so those are always kind of nice because they kind of do both for you.
How important is the customer and buyer decision journey in your content strategy?
Yeah, it's pretty much everything for us. I mean, like when we think about what we're writing, it's all centered around what piece of the product can we point people to. And so we start with the product and its features, and that's how we build out our themes. Basically, everything we talk about can tie back in some way, shape, or form to the product. And then we extrapolate from there and say, okay, like what about this topic our particular audience members need to understand? And so, for example, we have like at least monthly, we'll go through together as a team and listen to like sales calls and merchant calls and just take notes and share them with each other, see how they're talking about things. We have lots of different segments of our audience. For example, we serve like people who sell at craft fairs on the weekends, all the way up to like, hey, I have multiple brick and mortar stores. We serve people who were e-commerce first and then moved into the brick and mortar space, as well as the exact inverse of that. And so we have lots of different users and different things that they need. I mean, those segments of the audience, you think in person, okay, they're all kind of caring about the same things, but they're actually very, very different depending on what segment of our audience that you're talking about. So depending on who we're talking to, we have to know them so that we can kind of accurately point them to our product, because there can very easily be a mismatch depending on who we're talking to.
Awesome. That's great to hear. We've had a couple of questions come in. One was what we're just kind of talking about was like, what is it that's great about battle cards and organically focused on engagement from a qualitative standpoint? Oh, I think this is more of a statement. Yeah, it is. So do you have like, so battle cards for viewers and listeners, battle cards are basically a comparison of multiple different offerings, right? You see it all the time on like enterprise SaaS sites, where either they're comparing their own offerings internally, where like you get pro, agency, enterprise, or like call me, right? And it has the checks and the X's. And then you see the comparisons between like that one SaaS solution and their competitors. And then like the versus content has become very popular within Google. Like people that are, even today, we had written, or actually Julie Joyce had written a piece on Search Engine Journal about a year and a half ago about alternatives to Google Analytics. So this morning when Google announced that they're going to sunset Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, and move forward with GA4, first thing we did was like we started promoting that article about the alternatives to Google Analytics, because people search for that, right? When there's an announcement like that, people are like, uh-oh, I don't like G4. What else is there that we can use for backup to get the same kind of similar data that I'm getting from GA now? People search for things like that, alternatives, yada, 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 especially on the comparison side. In terms, do you have any additional recommendations on what you're doing in that journey to go a little bit beyond like just the versus or the alternative battle cards and kind of tell that story when people are hitting the site? Is there anything else that you implement in your posts like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's always a way to kind of weave that in, no matter what content you're writing about. So, for example, there was a case study we recently did about how someone migrated from a competing point of sale to Shopify point of sale. And so that's not really a battle card. That was more of a narrative, like, here's their journey about realizing, like, oh, I need to switch. And then what happened after they switched. And so that's a perfect example of kind of like a this versus that content, but like done in a more narrative format. Also at Shopify, and I think a lot of other companies too, like we have battle cards can be like more of a, I think a lot of times people view them as like an internal resource. And so if you have like an internal wiki or something like that, your sales team might use it just to enable them in conversations, but it's not something external facing. But that kind of stuff, if your company has them, that's really helpful information for your marketing teams so that they know how to position the external facing, like battle card type of this versus that content. So we've used that quite a bit. There is a team that is responsible for like enablement, that sort of thing, and keeping that up to date. That's separate from the content team at Shopify, or at least in my section of Shopify. And so like knowing where that is as a content marketer is gold, because that enables us to write all kinds of different content. We can weave that into even top of funnel content if we're talking about like a particular pain point in a top of funnel article. And we know that that's a pain point that like this people who use this competing point of sale struggle with, we can like kind of weave that in as a product plug into even top of funnel content. So it's great enablement for your content marketers as well.
Awesome. That's great. I love pain points and I love case studies, and taking a typical case study and turn it into a narrative. We're like, oh, these people are just like me. This is what they think. I'm so scared to change over. Am I going to lose data? Am I going to lose sales? Oh, what am I going to tell my accountant? Should I do this in January? Should I do this after April, et cetera, et cetera? I'm sure there's a lot there. So like the ability to calm people down, like it's not that bad. It's actually going to be great. It's worth the pain points.
Absolutely.
Sounds really cool. One question we have is, previously Moz, Spotify, great companies, but relatively smaller than where you're at right now. So on the Shopify side, let me back up a little bit. I had referred to like things like, PDFs being found on subdomains, or like, Zendesk subdomains that have information that conflicts with a post that's written on the main site. I see those. I'm speaking from personal experience, but I do see a lot as well, like just when doing search queries and stuff like that. So do you find in a larger company that there are some challenges like that you did not face previously within, I guess, more boutique SaaS oriented companies such as Moz or Botify or others? Like, what are you finding within a larger company like Shopify, that not necessarily saying that Shopify has these challenges, but that people should look out for during the great resignation and the great hiring movement? What are some things to look out for when someone does go into a new position at a new company or a larger company, that they can identify immediately to avoid issues like cannibalization of content or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd categorize that under the umbrella of just like big company things, big company considerations versus small company considerations. Like you said, it's not like issues inherent with any particular company. It's just that the bigger you get, the more you're going to have to consider like A, B, and C. And so some of those things, I'll start with the first thing I think that comes to mind is the cannibalization issue. And so for a company like Shopify, most people know Shopify for its e-commerce. You can build an e-commerce website on Shopify, and that's like the main product. But did you know that Shopify also has a point of sale, and also has a fulfillment network, and also has Shop, which is a consumer-facing app? So we have lots of different products, and how do we market them? Well, we need kind of like different teams to market all of those different products, and to be experts in marketing those different products. And so for me, working on retail, it's very necessary that I collaborate with all the different pockets within Shopify, because we do have a few different content properties, and we need to make sure that we're not kind of publishing on top of each other. We need to make sure that there's like, I hate to use the word maybe not, I don't hate to use the word actually, like governance over who can publish where and what goes where, like that kind of stuff is so necessary. I think a lot of people that are maybe coming from the startup world or like the scrappy kind of like we're a small company kind of world hate words like process and governance and things like that, but because they sound slow and they sound like very archaic and things like that. But once you get to a big company, it's really just stuff that will help you move faster. There's nothing that slows you down like a lack of clarity and like unclear ownership and roles. And so going into like a big company, knowing that like, okay, I need to figure out like which properties I publish on that I have governance over, what can we publish here? And before we publish here, making sure that it's not already like owned or taken care of by another area within the business. Because Shopify, like we talked about earlier in this conversation, it's all integrated, right? And so the fact that it's integrated means that there's content overlap opportunities as well. There's e-commerce and then there's in store, but there's an overlap on that Venn diagram in the middle where things apply to both an e-commerce seller and an in-person seller, like BOPIS. So who owns it? Who talks about that? So that kind of stuff is really important to figure out from the get-go so that you don't kind of publish something and have everyone saying like, no, we already have this on this blog, or oh, we already own
Yep.
this on this subdomain. So kind of getting that figured out from the get-go is really important.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Like if you're working on your side and BOPIS example, right? You do
Mhm.
a post on like how great Shopify POS system is for attracting people to be able to just come in the store or like curbside or whatever it may be. And then maybe a year ago, someone had already written something about that, right? And then the conflict there happening. It almost makes me think like if there was like a GitHub for content, right? You know,
Yeah.
how, because I run in this all the time too, like developer pushes something and it erases something that the developer did previously.
Right.
So if you're utilizing GitHub, apparently it helps from that happening, right? So
Yeah.
something like that from a content perspective from a large company could be really cool at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, are there any other, I guess, big company content considerations that people should be aware of if they are moving into a seat at a larger establishment, and or maybe even an agency or a consultant working with a larger enterprise company?
Yeah, definitely. I think like the larger you get, the harder it can be to make sure that information is disseminated to the right people. At a small company, I mean, the companies I've worked for before, there's usually like email distribution groups that go to the entire company and Slack channels that are just the entire company. And it's just really easy to be like, at here, hey, everyone, here's the thing that we did, and here are the results. And everyone knows now if they check their email or their Slack. Whereas at a big company, it's like, depending on what like Slack channels you're in and what email groups you're on, you may or may not reach all the right people that you need to reach. So I think on the one side of that coin would be like building relationships and building bridges into different teams so that you have that awareness, like information is flowing out of and into your team from other teams. For example, we have like an editorial council we just put together where lots of the different content leads within Shopify meet once a month to kind of talk about like, what are you guys working on? What's coming up? Do you have any questions for me? And so lots of information gets treated there, which is really good. And then I would say, yeah, just so aside from just the relationships, making sure that you set up the appropriate channels for communicating kind of what your team is doing and getting information from other teams that you need. So that can be a challenge when you're working at a larger company. I guess one other thing that I will say is that roles tend to get more specific the bigger the company that you're working for. So it's not uncommon in my experience to join like a smaller startup-y type of company and you're wearing like 10 hats. You're doing, so at Botify, I was doing like brand and content and SEO. And I was owning a lot of different things like from copy to long form to gated to webinars, like anything under that umbrella was me.
Sounds
Whereas
familiar.
at right at a larger company, it's like you might have someone owning just webinars and that's their job, and having someone just own like long form and someone just own copy, like short form copy. That's the reality at a lot of larger companies. So I would say that like if you're ready to kind of niche down and focus on one particular area, like skill set that you have, you feel like you've built like the top of the T and you would just want to go deep on one area, I would say that a larger company tends to, in my experience, is good for that.
That's great. So focused and niche as opposed to, what is it? A jack of all trades, master of none type thing.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's super cool. And yes, that does sound very familiar. In terms of SEO of pre-existing content, I'm not sure how long, like, it sounds like what you're doing right now is fairly very new from a content perspective on the Shopify site, the Shopify POS side. But do you have any recommendations on content that's aged, right? So like POS, curbside pickup, BOPUS, all sounds new, but I'm sure like even pre-pandemic, there were POS sales or content that weren't focusing on curbside or in person. So question is like, how do you typically update older content, refresh content, and any tips you may have on that side?
Yeah, 100% very passionate about this one. Actually, funny enough, like when I joined to lead the retail content marketing team, it was new, but they had been publishing content since about 2016. So there was a lot of historical old content that was just contributed by like a mishmash of people from different blog teams. Sometimes a product marketer would publish something. So it was just kind of like a rolling feed of a bunch of ad hoc stuff that had accumulated over the years. So there's definitely a lot more to clean up than you would think for like a new program. But yeah, definitely. I'm very passionate about this. I've done a few presentations on content refreshes and content decay. I'm sure if you Google that, one of them is ungated somewhere. I did it for MozCon. I've done it for a couple webinars before. So definitely feel free to like Google that. And I'm sure it'll come up if you're interested in like my full process and philosophy behind decay and refreshing stuff that has decayed. But in general, like I tend to view like decay in terms of like things that are consistently losing organic search traffic over time. Like clearly this isn't an anomaly. It's not a seasonal thing. It's something that is decaying and will continue losing traffic and detracting from our traffic totals unless we correct course and do something about it. Which can be really discouraging when you're trying to publish new content. There's new things that you want to publish about, but you have all of this old content that no matter how much new content you publish and you gain traffic for, you have this old content that's just like taking away from your traffic totals and ruining all of that traffic progress, which is very deflating. So prioritizing refreshes is super important for that reason. So go like digging into your Google Analytics and your Google Search Console to see things that are losing position and losing organic search traffic over time. And then I would dive down to the granular level of like, okay, what keywords have we lost the most positions for in this post over time? Because a lot of times it's like, okay, how do I update this post? What even needs to be updated? Well, you have to know like what keywords you used to be ranking for that now you're no longer ranking for. Because if you don't know that, you don't know what sections of your post to improve or add or tweak or things like that. So that's one of the top things I look for is just like, okay, what keywords have we lost the most positions for? And then what is now ranking? We're not ranking anymore. So what is ranking and where are the gaps? How can we fill that? But a layer on top of that, like you said, is just a matter of like, not just decay, but just topical, like things change over time, data points change over time. Like you don't want to be citing things from 2016. COVID obviously changed a lot of stuff. So talking about pop-up shops without mentioning, COVID and how that can be like a solution is, you don't want to miss those opportunities. And so just aside from organic search traffic, you want to update things like, is this timely? Is this relevant? Is this out of date? Is anything just not accurate anymore? So that's another layer that we look into as well.
It's very cool. I agree. I try to revisit things on an annual basis, especially if we see any kind of drop off or decay, right? We've done this at SEJ, obviously. I think we've published some case studies over the years, and then also on the client side as much as we can on that end, and then like adding and testing new schema attributes and stuff like that to older content, even to make it. Even at SEJ, what we'll do is like if something pops on news and we feel that it will become evergreen, we'll take a news piece and we'll turn it into an evergreen piece after say a month or two, like once that news story has gone away. But we'll just turn it into more of a how-to, add the how-to schema, kind of refresh it, get it out there, things like that, just to get more from it over time, and then address. So Do you have a system that you utilize for identifying content decay, or is it more so manually checking stats? Like, do you have any kind of alert system or any tools that you would recommend on that end?
Yeah, we don't have like any kind of alert system that like, we wake up in the morning, log on to our email and we get like an email that says like these 4 posts have decayed. Like that would be amazing. I'm sure there's tools now. I'm gonna get emails from a bunch of SaaS companies who
Oh
do
yeah,
this, like
yeah. Don't check every.
saying that
Yeah,
they have a
yeah.
solution. Which is, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, I think like my process is mostly just like being very vigilant about looking in Google Analytics and Google Search Console. We have like weekly data reviews as well as monthly data reviews to see like overall trends. So the weekly ones are great for seeing like little minute fluctuations. If we see the same type of downward fluctuation week over week for a couple of weeks, it's like, oh, this is a trend. This isn't an anomaly. So seeing those things week over week is really, I think, important to kind of just keep your eyes on. So like, for example, one thing we do is just look at the landing page report, like just segment it by organic search traffic only and see which posts lost the most organic sessions week over week or month over month. And then if you see something that looks like, especially concerning, like click into that and see what the trend line has looked like over time. Because a lot of times it's been steadily declining. And then that's like, bingo, let's prioritize that for a refresh.
I love that. One question I have too on the content side is, well, last week we had Jeff Coyle from Market Muse on, and we were talking a lot about content briefs, the importance of content briefs, and then AI powered or whatever, whatever, is it AI or just data powered content briefs, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes I think the word AI is stretched a little bit. So data powered content briefs. So my question is, do you do content briefs internally? What do they typically consist of? Are you looking at things like word count or competitive set, or just more so like what's going to fit within brand voice? Like any tips on that end?
Yes, I have also written about this pretty extensively on the Moz blog. If you want to check it out, or anyone listening wants to check it out, SEO focused content briefs. I think it's just the title, like how to write SEO focused content briefs on the Moz blog. It includes pretty much everything that we have in our content briefs that we use. So that's kind of like the format I've been using for a really long time, and just we've been building on that over the years and iterating on it and making it better and tweaking it depending on our specific use cases at Shopify, for example. So I think like that's a good foundation. I think it covers just about everything that you would need. And then I always tell people like, hey, if you're writing something and your needs slightly differ, like take this and then tweak from here. But I think it's pretty comprehensive. Like been working at that for a while. So yeah, it includes things like, when we brief in a freelance writer, we even include like the outline. So here's exactly like the H2s and H3s that we want to see. Here's what we want you to link to, stuff like that. I think is really important. The intent, the audience segment, title tag, meta description, all of that kind of stuff is included in there.
Nice. Yeah, I love content briefs. It reminds me of when I like doing outlines in school for like a report or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
It's like such a basic thing, but I think for a while, like we kind of skipped it. And now we're back to it, right? Let's outline this 2,000 word piece out before we start writing, and let's see what points support other points or what points support the key facts and things like that. So I just shared this post from Moz, how to write an SEO content brief your writers will love. Was that the original title, like your writers will love, or did you add that?
That was my title. Yeah, that was my original title. I think I gave them a couple options and that's the one they chose.
Nice. Really, I like it. And I see this is updated on February 10th, 2021. So that's good. Might have to revisit it sometime soon. Super cool. I had a couple questions come in while we're doing this, and I'm going to address a couple of them here. VP asks via LinkedIn, what are the most important things a small company should consider integrating in its content marketing strategy while keeping organic search in mind?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think small companies, yes, I would definitely say like no matter whether you're at a small company or a big company, but I guess especially if you're at a small company, like staying really close to your customers, I find it's easier at a smaller company because you might even just be able to hop on the phone with them and chat with them about like their concerns and just hear what they're saying and what they're talking about. And from there doing keyword research, because I think sometimes when we flip flop it and start with keyword research and it's not always applicable to our audience. So like when you're at a small company, resources are very finite. Like you don't have as many resources. And so getting really targeted about what you write, I think is super important. So I think the way to get more targeted and make sure you're writing about the right things and targeting the right keywords is knowing what your customers are actually care about.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I agree. Keyword research is great, but talking to customer service department and seeing what they're discussing is even better. And oh my gosh, I always, what is the name of the tool is escaping me now, but there's a SaaS tool out there that was originally produced to use for sales phone calls that records the call and then semantically basically lays out the words that are utilized most of the time on that call. And then you can download that from all of your customer service calls and utilize the terminology that they're using on those calls as well. Because your customers may call it something completely different than corporate calls it, right? Or use like regional modifiers like, I could call this a cup or a mug or whatever, like little things like that, right? To semantic modifiers that may be used regionally that aren't used, like hoagies, heroes, and subs, right? Things along those lines. So gosh, it's escaping me right now, but it will come right after we get off of this podcast. I'll remember.
Yeah. I don't know if Gong is the tool that you're thinking.
That's it.
Is that what it is? Yeah, because we use Gong. We've used that, or I've had that at the past couple companies I've worked at. And that's what we use to listen to all of those calls. Because it's not as if like, we're able to just tag on to calls in real time. A lot of the time they happen at times we're not available, and it's just nice to have them on demand. And you can search by little tags like, hey, like show me all calls that mention point of sale, or show me all calls that mention pop-ups, and you can kind of search things that way. And that has been invaluable for our team for sure.
Yeah. And I don't think Gong was made for that. I remember like checking it out when it first launched. It had a really bad UI and everything else. And now it's gotten a bunch of funding because I think they realize that it can be used for more than sales calls alone, right?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It's pretty amazing. That's gong.ai, I believe, is the site. So thank you for remembering that. It's like a full story for customer service calls or for phone calls. It's incredible.
It's great. Yeah. We have it for sales calls as well as like our, our merchant, existing merchant calls, which is great because you get like kind of both sides of the coin.
Sweet. And then thank you for the people that are viewing right now that let me know that it is Gong in the comments. That's awesome. It's not a secret anymore. It's out of the box. Next question comes from Jonathan asks, can you speak to how you're seeing programmatic SEO work well without creating duplicate content or crawl budget issues? Are you doing anything on the programmatic SEO side?
I guess it depends what is meant by programmatic SEO. Yeah. I mean, because I know everyone calls things different stuff, but I mean, we do have like a separate SEO department at Shopify, and they're focused on more of like the scalable strategies, things that are not. So for example, like the content marketing team absolutely has SEO at the forefront for a lot of our content. But we're not, doing audits. We're not doing like, hey, we're just doing a big keyword research. Now we're going to publish like 1,000 pages on this keyword research. Like we're not doing like big rock projects like that, but definitely Shopify has been exploring some like we call them scalable landing pages like that. And so basically like how to sell in X, and then it's just like the same page but like different types of products or different types of locations, and having unique content on each of those pages, but they're kind of formatted the same. So definitely something that our SEO team has been experimenting with, although I couldn't speak as directly to that because that's not my team.
Yeah, I think you're a little bit more hyper targeted, right? What about vertical targeting? How active are you with vertical targeting, and any tips on integrating vertical targeting into content strategy?
Yeah, 100%. So we do a lot of like vertical targeting, and we're getting more and more into it for example. And so we are kind of rethinking how like our user journeys work on our like main sales pages, and there are definitely lots of gaps. I mean, people search for, we'll back up a little bit. We did an experiment kind of mid last year that was like a verticalized experiment. We did like a vertical segment as well as like feature specific. Instead of just point of sale, we focused on like specific features within the point of sale. And so we did an experiment on that, and we found that like the more specific pages tend to perform better in terms of
Mm.
sessions and free trials and things like that. So it doesn't sound that revolutionary when you say it, like the more specific the better, but truly we've been finding the more specific the better. And so we've been finding a lot of cool information about that too, on just like, well, which verticals perform the best? Like, does jewelry store outperform clothing store, for example?
Right.
So we've been finding a lot of cool tidbits when we do things like that as well, on both the paid side for like the kind of quick learnings, and then the organic side of things as well, which we're building out.
Yeah, yeah. When I think of D2C, I think of jewelry, clothing, health and beauty products,
Mhm.
things like that. Are you targeting a lot of the same verticals with retail as you would be in the D2C side because of that, or is there any differences on that end?
Yeah, so I mean, with verticals, like we definitely kind of share verticals across Shopify. Some are more like inclined to be in certain segments than others. Like, people that make candles might be more inclined to sell at a craft fair than have like a brick and mortar candle empire or something like that. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Whereas like there are a lot of clothing stores in like the big D2C segment, as well as health and beauty. And so like different segments certainly like have are more inclined to be in different verticals. But yeah, there's definitely like some overlap in verticals. The difference comes in like what we talk about within those verticals. So we would talk about like jewelry store, like target a jewelry store, but talk about specifically like in-store things versus like a D2C strategy, like an e-commerce strategy.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I've really enjoyed hosting you today. I can't believe we've already been on the air for an hour almost. So it's gone by really quickly. Lots of great tips for any viewers or listeners. We're going to be recapping today's show with Kameron Jenkins of Shopify on SEJ. The video will be made available along with the audio drop that's going to happen the last week of March, I believe. And then also, I think there's so much great information in here that we can probably maybe put an article or two together. So it's really been a pleasure hosting you today, Cami. I've dropped your Twitter profile in the comments, along with LinkedIn and your Moz article as well. Do you have any tips or ideas or other places we can find you that we can finish up with today?
Yeah, I mean, those are the main places. Like, I've definitely done a lot of writing on like even Search Engine Journal before on some of the things that I'm most passionate about. So even if you just Google my name, you might be able to find a lot of those articles if you're curious about other things that I've written on, for sure. So if you are curious and want to learn more about some of the things that I'm passionate about and have written about, that would be a good way to do that too.
Oh, I will definitely drop a link to your Search Engine Journal author profile page here. So that's
Awesome.
not a question.
Cool.
Let me do that right now.
Cool.
And really enjoyed having you today. We live in the same town, but we've never met each other before. So in real life, so maybe we'll have a chance to do that sometime soon. And I really appreciate you taking the time to drop in the show today to talk a little bit about what you're doing with content on the Shopify retail side of things, and to answer some of the questions that we've had. If anything else comes across in the comments that are some really good questions, would you mind if we sent them over to you?
Yeah, definitely. Always happy to answer any more questions, especially relating to anything we chat about today. But no, this was super fun. Thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. So this has been Kameron Jenkins of Shopify Retail and Lauren Baker talking about content strategies for SEO and beyond today. Thank you again to our sponsors, InMotion Hosting and SEMrush. I hope all of you have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Search Engine Journal Show. If you liked this episode, subscribe to our channel for so much more and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing.